for Alavari to be. Oh, it just says you're live now. Okay, let's try again. So I'm very grateful, Alavari, to be here. All I'll say is I'm a Muslim, he's an atheist, but we both have an interest in the Quran and spiritual ideas. And today, an idea or topic was suggested, which is what is true human nature? In particular, I suppose, the phrase in Islam is the fitra. What is the fundamental human nature? And why is that important? I always try to ask, why are we talking about anything? And that is, I think a lot of people are feeling like they are more and more detached from their true nature. They're finding getting happiness really difficult. And it feels like it shouldn't be. Like, you might have lots of things, yet you might still be really unhappy. And just to do like a quick overview of what I'm going to say, based in the Quran, and I'm not going to read the verses of the Quran. I think they're there to be contemplated. Of me and Alavari in our Quran classes, we could spend like hours just in one verse. So it's like poetry. Read it carefully. Check it out in the description. I've got a summary of what I want to say. But in short, there are three fundamentals that I see from the Quran that are part of the fitra, our true human nature. And I'm going to give evidence, scientific evidence, how that's true. So it's not like you have to be a Muslim to believe this stuff. And those three things are to serve, to be united, and to believe in God. Yeah, so that's the introduction. Alavari, how do you feel about that stuff?
I think we can, from a humanistic point of view, we can look at human nature as one way to look at it is an evolutionary product. So it's been arrived at through the natural selection process. So if we have we could consider, for example, um, the Ibn Tufayl kind of Hakim Yakzan or Robinson Crusoe type of uh, context where a person is stranded on a desert island or just wakes up in the middle of nature uh, and they're just out of any civilization or context and they're just there just to fend for themselves. And indeed, I've been Ibn Tufay's Hayy ibn Yaqzan is really influential in this, and from an Islamic perspective as well. When I would say, so that maybe human nature outside of civilizational pressures, outside of propaganda, outside of media, outside of the socialization that we've built for ourselves, we've kind of built a bubble, and we call things inside of that bubble artificial or man-made, and then we call things outside of that bubble human nature, which is an arbitrary distinction because uh, one way to look at the world around us, indeed the humanistic way to do it, is to see that we are parts of it. It's useful. It's a useful metaphor. It's a useful construction. And that sometimes we can say, okay, well, for example, uh, you know, greenhouse gases. How much of it is being emitted by humans artificially? How much of it is being emitted
Mm.
naturally? So we can have these kind
I
of
get
distinctions.
I feel like we should always try to find sort of lines that are logically, so to rather keep them arbitrary, like, oh, what is nature and what's not. We should find ways of defining things so that it's beneficial to us. So, for example, psychologists find patterns in our human behavior cross culturally, and we'll be talking about that soon. Um, and things that generally make us happy. And I would try to make some sort of dividing line that long term happiness is a way of saying what is nature. It might not be perfect way, but it's a useful way. How do you feel about that? Because I like the idea of going away from calling everything arbitrary.
Uh, what do I think of the idea of logically proceeding from base axioms or
Yes, to finding
yeah.
some sort of rules that say this is nature that seems to be in line with our nature and this doesn't. So when we're all detached from each other, we seem to get more unhappy, and that suggests to
Yeah.
me as evidence that, oh, maybe that's our nature to be together, because we don't like being not
Mm.
together and isolated. So in London, the biggest killer in London is loneliness, for example. We have lots of stuff, but it doesn't make us happy by itself.
Yeah, I would say that that seems plausible. Again, I'll keep referring to Hayy bin Yaqzan, and I'd really recommend people to read that because it's a text of world civilization, not just Islamic civilization. And actually, in that, Hayy bin Yaqzan, he grows up alone for the first, I think it's sort of 30, 40 years of his life before someone else joins him on the island. And in that time, he ideas of natural religion, natural science. Um, a yeah natural philosophy, all of these, of course he doesn't have these external terms, that's what we would call them, but in the book they're described that way. So it takes a long time for someone to join him, and then he then starts to teach what he essentially comes to live more or less like a some kind of an ascetic or Sufi or mystics way, really in touch with nature, really not caring about who's watching or what's happening. He's just trying to he's just trying to build for himself some rules. For example, he's
Mm.
vegetarian. He doesn't want to kill and be seen to be feasting upon the other animals that share this island with him, for example. So, but he does.
How did he
Uh,
come to that? I don't want to go into any
mm,
particular. I'm just going to
yeah,
ask
yeah.
about that one thing about being vegan, for example. Does that seem to be in line with nature? Would you? I would say it's not. Like, we have a way of determining herbivores, omnivores, and all this kind of stuff just from their teeth, for example. We say that about dinosaurs, even though we've never seen them, right? And we can see our teeth. We have largely flat teeth, but some what's it called,
Hmm.
canine teeth and things like that, incisors and whatever. It gives us
Yeah.
evidence, and we shouldn't detach ourselves from nature or give ourselves separate rules, I guess,
Hmm.
if we're being fair. So I'd say it seems to be in line with our nature to eat animals, and we to say it's cruel is, I think, it's not logical.
Yeah.
Because we all feed on each other. We should say lions are cruel if we're going to say we're cruel, for example.
Well, we have an option not to do it. The Lions don't, as far as we know. They
But
don't. It's
we're
questionable.
trying to make not separate rules for human beings. Do you know what I mean? Like, not two
Well,
separate
we
rules
have to
as
take the context. I think we
mm,
can't. We're not making separate rules. It's already there. And one rule is if we assign moral responsibility based on understanding of the situation, understanding of the factors at play, and the ability to make a different decision. If we tell a lion, it's okay, don't go hunt today, just sort of lie in and be lazy, have a lazy Sunday, it can't, the lion can't understand, as far as we know, the lion can't understand that. It can't, or if we tell the lion, actually, here's this 3D printed meat that's not derived from, that's not taken from killing another organism, have that instead. Maybe the lion might try to eat it, maybe to make it smell the same or whatever, but it's not making
mm.
a choice by itself. It's kind of, a dumb animal in some ways, as far as we know. Again, it's difficult to,
So we're
the overall,
separate because we have a
we're not
moral
separate.
ability. Oh.
No, no, I think we don't have to impose the separateness on that discussion. All I'm saying is the overarching rule, if you want to find one, is let's not judge others, let's just judge ourselves. Or in some sense, I'm not even judging you, I'm just talking about myself. Me, myself, I choose to be a vegan because I can make a choice to not kill another animal and impose suffering on that other animal to derive the nourishment that I need in order to live. I've made that choice myself. I'm not sure about you, you seem to be conscious, but I don't know. The lion, I don't know. So I'm not making this. So that's a consistent rule. What you're doing is for you. If I can explain how I approach my life, if that influences you, okay, great. And that's also another Islamic value. So we are individually responsible, not the imam, not the dad, not the
Mm.
mum, not the. We can't subcontract out our theological kind of reflections and our autonomy and our ability to come to a moral reasoning, a morally
Sure.
reasoned
And
action to
we're
someone
we're
else.
we're not just we're not how on a pin make it slightly different to liberal perspectives that we're all individuals, we have a right to do whatever we want, sort of thing. We're individuals responsible or individually responsible to God and God's very, very clear rules, which makes it a little bit different to the liberal sort of idea, I guess, which is we're free to do we have the right to do what we want, when we don't have the right to do what we want in Islam. We have the responsibility, mainly we're focused on responsibility to do what God asks of us to do. Would you say that's a
Yes.
fair way?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have the responsibility to be accountable for our actions. And again, to go back to Ibn Tufayl, so at his time, what he was trying to, and it's still a major point of philosophical contention, is does revelation conflict with empirical observations? If I just, again, as a Tarzan, as a Hayy ibn Yaqzan, as a Robinson Crusoe, or Robinson Crusoe he didn't grow up there. He grew up in the UK and then he was stranded on an island. But essentially, that kind of a desert island kind of life, can we, in some sense, arrive at the universal values in the Quran just through human nature, just through just looking at it like a baby? If a baby is there and then a puppy is next to it, and I hit the puppy, and the puppy, sort of moans in pain, the baby will cry. Like that's a very natural. That's a very,
I love it. I love it.
without telling the baby that the dog is in pain. There's something inside the baby. So there's something inside our genetic blueprint from a very young age, from when we distinguish between the self and the outside world. There's something there that tells us we pain is bad, and and even not even pain that we're experiencing, almost through the mirror neurons of, and that dynamic of a pain being experienced by another organism, even if it's pathable, we kind of somehow feel it. When we
Yeah.
smack a fly, we
So
somehow
I
feel
want
it.
to
Yeah,
distinguish
can that be made
between.
into a natural religion? Is the question.
Yeah, I want to distinguish between different levels of nature, because there's the nature of wanting to steal. For example, I want this quick and all this, short-term pleasure over long-term benefit and all this kind of stuff. But the kind of nature I want to refer to is something that will give us long-term happiness, and this is what I think the Quran is talking about. There's this selfish nature where we just follow our desires. Our animal self is one of the descriptions in the Quran, nafs amara, right? But when God is giving a religion, and religion is something in line with our nature, it means what God is saying is, yes, sure, there's this animal self, but there's a self that we truly want. So even if we steal, it doesn't really make us happy. What we really want is to serve. So would you agree that there's two levels of nature that we're talking about? And I think ideally we're talking about the higher level of our nature that makes us happier longer, rather than the hedonistic self that makes us miserable. Do you see the difference in the two natures I'm talking about? The selfish nature and what we really aim for deep down, if we really truly knew ourselves.
I would say I understand that there's different aspects of human nature. Again, if we don't want to make arbitrary distinctions or unnecessary, or in some sense externally imposed divisions on nature, I would approach it more. And I use that as well. I've used that in previous discussions. Our animalistic nature, our lower nature. Again, these are good. These are like artificial and man-made and natural. Natural gas, or natural, like genetic modification, as opposed, GMOs, as opposed to what nature does. They're useful for certain fields of study to have these divisions. And again, in psychology and spirituality, it's useful to say, if someone tries to tell me something or give me some advice, and my ego sort of pricks up, and I come back at them, and I sort of have a very ego-dominated response, a very jealous response, a very prideful response, then that could be an example of a lower nature. But if I don't, if I see that person as just another someone who's trying to share their wisdom with me, and receive them very magnanimously, that's a higher nature. So in certain fields of study, for example, spirituality and psychology, we may have these higher and lower nature, and I think they're useful concepts. I don't think they reflect a fundamental reality as such. I think
Okay,
it's
so
a human
I'm going
position.
I love secular Quranism's question, which is clear. Are the laws of God arbitrary? And I'm going to get into the meat of it now, because I'm going to say they're not arbitrary, they're not random, but they're so well designed that every time we move away from them, we really suffer. We get depressed and things like that. And the three key things, like I said a minute ago, or at least in the beginning, were we need to serve, be united and believe in one God. And I said I'll give some evidence. So I want to show that it's not arbitrary. So the some evidence would be, for example, in the description, I've given a document where it says under serve, there's a really fun TED talk. TED talk is like talks by specialists in particular field, in this case psychology, and it's called How to Buy Happiness. And sounds really kind of anti-religious or something, but it's not, because actually Islam is all about spending money wisely rather than being against capitalism, for example. So, for example, in this video, it tells us that they did a study where if you bought coffee for somebody else, it will make you more happy than buying coffee for yourself. So there's an element of serving there. So let's just focus on that one thing at a time. One of these. So I said in the beginning, serving, being united, and believing in God. We're focusing on the serving bit at the moment. How do you feel about, is service fundamental to human nature? I would say it is, because it makes us happier long term. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Service is one word to use. I would maybe use a broader term called altruism. There is that, or maybe again charitable nature, or in sharing, having or cooperation, something along those lines. Altruism, cooperation, sharing, service, kindness. That's that, and not just to our own progeny, not just to our own relatives, but in cooperation in a tribe. I would say that there is a that is an observable part of human nature. We can observe that. For example, if we did a high Ibn Yaksan experiment and put 5 people there on a desert island, they will cooperate in some ways, or that they all, if they all grow up on a desert island completely cut off from civilization, they will cooperate in some ways because it's a survival strategy. So I think that's certainly part of human nature. I
So
wouldn't say
that
that the
doesn't
laws.
sound like service just by itself, because there's a utility in working together, right? But in our
There's also
modern
use.
world, and I like this thing you mentioned about the bubble, because in our modern world, we're shielded to some extent, and we can make the mistake of being selfish for a while, but then eventually we have to pay for it, and human nature kicks back in. So I want to say that even beyond the utility, the obvious direct utility of helping each other, like you should, and I basically, it's not a, I want to say this discussion is not this sort of academic thing. I want to encourage people to be more self-aware by doing this video, say really try hard to help other people when you can see no benefit. I think, how do you feel about that? That's real service when you can't see any benefit, like giving love when this, in the modern world, like love is this thing that's become transactional, that you only love people who are kind to you and who are not, everybody's become, what's it called, toxic. I love people who are toxic or not toxic, but I'm more kind to people who are not in the transactional way, but I want to encourage people to be kind when they're kind, so I'm more kind to them. How do you feel about this idea of being of service when there's no obvious benefit?
Mm, Yeah, we've talked about it before. I think I personally think that's really important, and it's something that I strive for in my life. Unconditional love, unconditional. I think we've had conversations on that topic before. Unconditional service, but I think we also have to acknowledge the reality that we do get some utility from it, even if it's a psychological, hormonal feedback of, oh wow, I'm a good person, aren't I? Wow, I've done this. I get a pat on the back, or I can talk about it, or even just seeing the pleasure and the smile in someone's face that you do love, or maybe that you even don't love, a stranger, can be a feedback. So I think that's also a reality in that and again, it makes sense that we're programmed to think that making someone smile is a good thing because we can cooperate better, we can build a relationship better. So we're survival machines. We're always looking for ways to build relationships. We're social animals, and that, in some evolutionary theory way, is going to help our survival because we're stronger together rather than individual. Isolationists, people who have mental conditions that means that they don't communicate well. We're programmed to think that that's not a survival strategy. So we want to connect. You know, if someone's rude to us, we remember that, where we think about that all day. Why is a person rude
Mm,
to me? Because we're programmed to have a red flag go off in our minds. Oh, because have I done something wrong? Am I not socializing properly? And then we have the overthinking kind of response and so on, and over analysis. These are all evolutionary strategies from, I think, our tribal uh, origins, living as hunter-gatherers, living as hominids early on in Homo sapiens history, that helps us survive, and out of that comes a psychology, and out of that comes a social psychology, all that we understand now about how human dynamics work. But
what do you say to people who claim that that's not really part of our nature? When we don't need, when now that we're not hunter gatherers, and the government provides so many things, society provides so many things, that we don't really need people anymore. We're fine without people. There's a lot of people who feel that way. They don't get into relationships anymore. All sorts of things.
yeah,
Yeah. What argument do you give them?
again, this idea of it's in our nature is basically being used as a tool or as a proxy for fully developing an argument. I find it's in our nature. It has come to mean I really like it, and I like doing it. It's in our nature. Again, we have to remember it's an arbitrary division. Is uh, it is
Is it completely arbitrary? Because I don't want to go back, because I'm saying long-term happiness should be a
no,
marker for
whether or
nature.
not something is artificial. We've drawn the line between that. So, for example, is you know is using condoms in our nature or artificial? Well, in some sense, it's artificial because in the wild, we weren't looking for ways to you know for contraceptive methods and to limit our reproduction. On the other hand, it's human nature because we're doing it, aren't we? We came up with it. We came up with that idea. So it must have come from somewhere. We're natural beings. So is using
Mm,
condom natural or not natural? Is cutting our nails natural or not natural? In some ways, it's
mm,
natural. In some ways, it's not natural because we don't see chimpanzees doing it. Actually,
mm,
sometimes we do. Sometimes they do have to sort of, they sand down their claws on tree trunks, and when they get the kind of itch to, or that their nails grow too long, their claws grow too long, they do also do that as well. But then even if they don't do that, we invented nail clippers to serve a certain
mm.
utility,
I
just
think
like we
there's
use
evidence for
yeah.
all of these things. We can actually
Is
say,
is is fire
is
is using
condom.
fire natural or not natural? The
Yeah.
fire with two
So
sticks
I can
making fire
say,
with little swords.
I would say all of those things that you're pointing out, there's ways of looking at them. So you'd say, there's something, uh, in all of those situations, which one gives you long-term happiness? I would say condoms, use of condoms, you should do it
I think we're,
sparingly.
I think we're asking different questions
Sure.
here. What I'm asking
Yeah.
is it? I'm trying to illustrate the fact that is it natural or is it not natural is not
Sure.
a definitive, true,
Sure.
sort of bright line
It's not
definition.
easy
It
to
can be
make a clear-cut
flexible and
answer.
exactly right. So that's first thing to understand.
Not easy,
Then if you come
but you
back
still
to
can.
yeah, then if we come back to is it natural to not want a wife and just say, well, the state's going to take care of me, or not want grandchildren, not want a family because the state is my family and the welfare state's going to take care of me. Again, I would say the important question there is not is it natural or is it not natural? It's is it socially beneficial? And so if we, or like a categorical imperative, if everyone stopped mating and pair bonding, and everyone just said, listen, I'm going to pay taxes and I'm going to pay into a common pot, and the state is going to be a nanny and take care of me when I can't take care of myself at the end of life, or the state's going to provide an AI bot for me to, have
Sure.
companionship
So
with.
sure. Would you
Yeah,
say there's any evidence either way to say that, because we're trying to separate the idea of the selfish nature and the long-term thinking, you know, wiser nature that actually makes
the
us
higher
happier.
nature and the
So
lower nature, right?
sure. Is there anything about, yeah, the high, let's call it the higher nature, right? So is there any evidence that, for example, getting married or being social, because I'm gonna focus on this
Yes,
being
yeah,
united element, because I was saying
yeah,
three
yeah,
things that are fundamental to us. Is there any evidence that our higher nature prefers to be more united?
yes, yeah. There is evidence of that.
Well, I mean,
Psychological
what would it be
evidence.
in your?
Yeah. psychological studies, evolutionary. It's the evolutionary mechanism, as we just said before. That we're if someone's rude to us, we think about that all day. These are evolutionary mechanisms that, from a humanistic point of view, we've developed to ensure that we're fitting in socially into the social group, to make sure that we're not just sort of blindly, aloofly offending other people. That could affect our survival strategy. Therefore, for that evolutionary reason, we are programmed to want to unite. One aspect of that is true, but on the other hand, same with, as we were saying before, about the unconditional service and doing things without getting anything out of them. There is a reality that we have to face, that as much as that's human nature, unconditional altruism is part of human nature. We observe that even in other animals and organisms. As much as that's true, we also have to accept that being selfish is part of human nature. Having it for me, me. Because if it's there's no tribe, if it's just you or me, and we have to survive on a desert island, and there's not enough food for both of us, the survival instinct will kick in. And because my genes have to survive more than your genes, so we have a kind of a based
Sure, but
animalistic
we're trying to focus on
survival there. So
it,
both are,
let's not.
but both are
I
natural.
go on. I try
Yeah,
to avoid extreme situations where you have to like you have to
but through
eat the
extremes
other
we can
person
test
kind of
the
thing.
theory and
Right.
understand how far
Sure.
it's
Yeah,
applicable.
but I think it's safest to, because if you go keep away from the extremes, you can get closer to what normal nature is, right? Because there are some extreme
I, I,
situations where
I disagree. I think the extreme thought experiments, which is what I just derived there, thought experiments and analogies are useful in understanding the limits of a theory, of an idea, and how much an argument can be stretched. So if we're
sure.
saying that, what I don't want us to say is that only being altruistic is being natural, but being selfish is not being natural, because that's not my understanding. My understanding is both of them are natural. You can make an argument for both of them to be part of our genetic endowment, part of what it
But
means to
that's a
be
really
human.
dangerous way of looking at things, because you want to look what's normally good for you rather than what's good for you in the almost non-existent cases. Yeah, like when there's only two of you and there's only enough food for one person, you must kill the other person, for example, to get the food. All this kind. These are
But
extreme
that,
situations. Are not
no,
helpful.
no, that thought experiment. First of all, that does happen. For example, like people getting stranded on avalanches, or it does actually happen. Accidents and so on. People getting trapped down mines. It does happen. So it's part of the reality. So we have to observe
Mm.
it. But in extreme circumstances, so let me use an analogy. If you have a motorcycle accident and you cut, and you damage a particular nerve in your brain, and that nerve stops working, and then that means a particular function stops working. Okay, not everyone will have that motorcycle accident that cuts that nerve, but in that extreme scenario, we were able to use that extreme situation to understand something about our anatomy. Okay, this particular nerve maps to this function, right? We
Hmm.
understood that because of that extreme scenario. Same thing if two people are trapped down a well, or in a mine, or like those that Thai football team, those kids that were trapped down that cave,
Oh yeah, I
all those
was
years
thinking
ago.
about that.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So that
They
when that
didn't eat
happened,
each other.
hmm?
Yeah. They didn't
Yeah,
eat each other despite being extremely hungry and think almost facing
I
death.
think they had food, and they had Uber rescue. But okay, but
Yeah.
in such extreme scenarios, and there have been cases where people have been stranded in a dinghy or in desert, and there has been cannibalism. So, or stranded in the alpine avalanche kind of in mountain regions, and they have resorted to cannibalism. We have to understand these as data points, but the extreme situations can help us map. Okay, here's what the human psyche will do or wants to do in those situations. Now, I'm not saying that everyone day to day is going to hunt and kill other people. It's not like some kind of horror movie out there. But that need, or that part of that psyche is within us, and that must map to some kind of genetic predisposition that we have. And it doesn't make sense for survival, fight or flight, for example. When there's an accident, when there's a train accident, when there's a fire in a crowded movie theater, people will just run. People run over other people, run over old people. Sometimes you can't help it because it
Yeah.
has that system one, system
Sure.
two thinking reaction. So we can't
I'd say
ignore
we
this
don't
part
need
of
too
reality.
many thought experiments because society is giving us feedback all the time. So in
Oh, if a
terms
not even
of the
thought
second,
experiment, a crowded movie theater and someone yells fire and people run for the exit, or even like how many terrorist attacks do
I
we have
don't
all
know
the
the
time?
last time
Hmm.
that happened or an actual example, but it would be
Okay,
nice to see how many
okay.
examples.
Then
But I like to.
in Moscow earlier this year,
I,
there was a terrorist attack in that concert hall, right? So we have to
oh,
understand
the Russian one is what you're
the
talking about.
Russian one, yeah, exactly. So
Okay, yeah.
if we want to understand how people, what our
I
psyche
don't really
is,
know the details of
extreme,
exactly what happened. They all ran. They didn't. They didn't know where the bullets were coming from. There wasn't
yeah,
any need to
exactly,
stand in
yeah.
the way of bullets or anything, or that kind of. There was no. I didn't see there was any non-altruistic situation. I don't know the details of that, but I mean, were there
Okay,
any sort of situation? But I mean,
I'm yeah,
what?
I'm telling you from looking at, like, I've done, for example, like, event management training with Central Ambulance, for example. Well, and we train for disasters. We train for, like, I've been to Wimbledon, I've been to football matches where there's 60,
Hmm,
70,000 people in a Hillingdon, for example, the disaster, Hillingdon disaster in the UK was at where
sure,
a
Liverpool,
football
yeah.
stadium collapsed. So these kind of things we have to understand if we're talking about what human nature is and how human nature can behave in various circumstances. Yes, day to day, the day to day
But what
behaviors
I
can
wanted to
happen.
quickly get across is
Mm.
that there is so much really large scale statistical data that's telling us what our true human nature is. For example, I've put an article saying loneliness is on its way becoming Britain's most dangerous condition, right? And loneliness has been long London's biggest killer and things like that. There's tons of data that tells us when we start
And this
veering
is also
away
some of that
from.
data. This is part
Yeah,
of that
so I'd
data.
say
So
there's
we can't
more
confuse
data in
data.
that sense rather than these sort of one-offs,
No,
fire
so
in a
let me ask you the
cinema,
question.
for example.
Do you think are you saying that selfishness is not part of our human nature?
I wouldn't. We've already distinguished between our lower self and our higher self, our higher nature,
Right.
right? And I'm
But
saying,
they're both part of
and
our nature.
our higher nature requires us to
Mm.
serve people, but also now we're talking about the united bit. So our higher nature
Okay, well,
wants us
can we
to
put that
unite
aside for the
us.
moment? Just don't let's come to higher nature, higher and lower afterwards. Is being selfish part of our human nature, under your understanding?
It's part of our lower self. So in the Quran, there's
So,
three levels.
we
Yes,
can stop right
it's
with the
there,
question.
but I
It
don't
is part
think
of our nature. It
I'm
is
going to
part of our
answer the
nature.
question how I like, but that's how I'd say it. So it's part of our lower self that doesn't make us
But
happier.
why is that uncomfortable for you to say that
It's
it's
not
part of
uncomfortable.
our?
It's a useless.
Okay,
I'm trying to make a useful video. That's why. So I would
okay, no,
answer
but
the question the way the most
okay,
useful to the
yes,
viewers.
but
Yeah,
we can't confuse the audience. So there's human nature, there's higher and there's lower, but they're both part of human nature, correct?
sure. Yep.
Okay,
And we
right,
can move
okay,
out of different parts
right,
of our nature.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, so higher nature and lower nature are both part of our human nature, and selfishness is part of our lower nature. So therefore, selfishness is part of human nature. Are we agreed on that? I'm not sure why that's so complicated to agree with.
Um.
It's useful, it's clear, we've delineated it, we've incorporated your
Sure. I've
higher and lower
already said
nature.
there's a lower nature and a higher nature, and we shouldn't follow our lower nature. It's not good for us. And
That's
I'm
fine.
trying
That's fine.
to
Yeah,
make
I'm not
videos
saying,
where
I'm not
we
proposing.
benefit.
Yeah, I'm not, yes, I'm not.
Sure. I've already
I've
said
already
that. Yeah.
pointed out. Yeah, I've already pointed out that sometimes people use that's part of our nature as kind of like a shortcut in the argument to we should do that thing. And I'm not saying that. I'm not saying just because something is part of our nature, we should automatically do it because that is their argument. People will say, "Oh, it's natural. It's part of human nature." No, it's part of human nature, and we pick and choose which parts of our nature to pursue, and based on that, we're judged. If you believe there's a God, then the God will judge you on that.
Mm.
But yeah,
I
so
would
that's
say
not.
I don't pick and choose because pick and choose means you don't really have any values. I'm
No, pick
very
and choose means you
careful on
do
what
have
makes sense.
values. Yeah, as in you have a free
Yeah,
choice in that it's my human nature. If I'm feeling hungry and there's some food there, I can just take it and eat it. That's one choice. Another choice is to check if has someone else prepared that food. Maybe a child is expecting that food. I shouldn't just take it and walk away. Which one of those you
sure.
do is a choice that you'll be judged on. But both of them are part of our human nature. If we sort of want the food and we want it for ourselves, we're really hungry. That's there's a genetic evolutionary reason to do that. But if we don't do that, if we decide not to listen to our lower nature, as you put it. And if we decide to ask, has someone else put that food for themselves, or are someone else waiting to have it? I can't just steal it. That's also part of our human nature. So whether we say something's part of our human nature can't be an easy get out clause to post hoc justify our behavior. And I think we're agreed on that, because I think that's the danger that you want to avoid. But you don't just want to say, oh, it's my nature to sometimes be lonely, or sometimes be selfish, or sometimes not go towards unity or service, so therefore I should do that. No, yeah, it is part of our human nature to be selfish sometimes, but that doesn't mean that's a good thing. It doesn't mean that
Sure.
yeah.
So, Mike, a regular watcher and sometimes participant, is making a claim. He's saying, "Are the laws of God arbitrary?" He says, "Yes," and often, and I've already demonstrated it's not often. It's the opposite. As soon as we go away from the laws of God, makes us depressed. And then he picks out an example as look at the laws on blasphemy, and that's a brilliant segue into the final of the three things that I claim and the Quran claims are part of human nature, and that is to believe in one God. And my initial thing I'm going to say is, besides the evidence that says it is an on, okay, so I'm going to start with Viktor Frankl, who's a famous psychologist, who essentially said that we need meaning to be happy, and we can't have meaning unless there's a God. He called God the super meaning. Okay, because everything falls apart. Like, what's the point of that? What's the point of that? There needs to be a foundation upon which all action is, and nothing makes sense if the world is random and without a God. When there's a God, suddenly meaning can exist. So, Mike, there's tons of evidence to say, not only theoretically, but even psychologists will tell you, like Viktor Frankl, that absolutely, so being blasphemous is essentially God. It doesn't affect God, right? It affects you, by ignoring God and thinking God is pointless. Okay, that's the effect of blasphemy. And when you do that, you you rob yourself even of meaning, and then you'll be depressed, and that will make you long term unhappy. And thus, you can see that in increasingly godless societies, you become more unhappy, and you don't feel the need to do the other things, for example, to serve and be united, because we think short term. We go, oh, I don't need this. I don't need to talk to my neighbor. I'll just be friends with Netflix, and watch videos, endless streaming videos, right? But when you have the long term, when you know that God is watching you, you actually make better choices, long term choices, because you're thinking until eternity, like until the next life, and not thinking about until tomorrow, for example. So I would tell you, Mike, really, I worry for you if you think that any of the laws of God are arbitrary, and even the idea of blasphemy, that is not arbitrary. It's for your own good to not ignore God. Yeah. So what are your thoughts? How do you disagree with my argument just there? How do you feel about Mike's comment?
I would say I want to just be clear about how I understand the term arbitrary. To me, arbitrary means that, as you said before, Khaled, it's random. It's part of no greater system, or there doesn't seem to be any purpose to it. So, for example, if we say, uh, class, please divide into three groups: red, blue, and green groups. Like, that's arbitrary. I could have said one, two, three. I could have said there's no reason to choose that. So that's what I mean by arbitrary. So in that sense, I still stand by my previous answer. I don't think the laws are, divine laws in the holy text are arbitrary. I think they definitely have a purpose. Even if you're critiquing religion, you might say, well, they're the opiates of the masses. So they're made to make people into a, more manageable, more socializable group. So they don't kill each other. They don't let their lower natures develop, for example. So I don't think that it's arbitrary or random in that sense. The laws on blasphemy. So if you want to have a society that's all in submission to a a divine being, it makes sense. I'm not saying I agree with it. It makes sense to have some kind of control on speech. Actually, even secular societies say that they don't have blasphemy because they don't have a god as such. but they do things like hate speech or things that are very, very emotional, things that can run deep with people. If you're telling someone to believe and pray to a God every day, and then someone else comes along and blasphemes against that God, that doesn't make for a very united society and for a civic discourse. So it makes sense. I can
Okay,
imagine a
so
reason for having that. So I don't think it's arbitrary.
we've got Claire asking you specifically, is it your position that God's laws are arbitrary?
No, I've said several times in this discussion that I don't believe the laws in any holy text, Quran, divine laws, Bible, I don't think they're arbitrary. Because arbitrary, as I said, means random, having no purpose, having no part of no system. And that's not what I
Sure.
see.
So they're part of a system that
They're
makes
part of a
society
system.
better.
Yeah, or they're serving some spiritual purpose or serving some divine civilization, whatever. Even if I don't agree with them, I mean, I study the laws of God, the laws of divine laws, laws of religion, whatever you want to call them. I do study them in many religions to understand how people come to their beliefs, and I don't see them as being arbitrary.
Okay, cool. And then there's a study, there's Oxford spent about 1.9 million pounds on multiple studies, not actually one study, looking at belief in God, whether it's natural or not, and they found it is natural. They did an international study, so cross-cultural study, to test young people, young kids, especially who are not, and somehow, uh, yeah, I don't know the exact details, but apparently shielded them from their cultural norms or something. Or I think it's after 2 or something years old, you get more and more influenced by cultural norms and things. So somehow they came to the conclusion that belief in God is actually natural. Maybe the nature of that God is not clear, and I would say no study is completely, clear cut and it's going to tell you all the answers. But yeah, so there's that study, quite fairly well known, that says God is natural, and I'd say in a way you didn't have to wait for that study because it's very unnatural to think that anything or we or organization comes about by itself, but it always comes about through some sort of intelligence. It's actually very unnatural not to believe in God. How do you feel about that?
Mm, I'm not sure it's helpful to, again, going building on what we said before about the use of the word natural and artificial. I think they're useful in some circumstances, but I don't think they're useful in the explanation that you gave, because um, yeah, yes, I believe in one part of it, as in ascribing things that happen. For example, it rains, there's thunder, and ascribing that to like a thunder god. That does seem to be uh, part of our natural disposition, part of our fitra, because we see that, for example, in hunter-gatherer societies now, in societies that have been cut off from civilization, if for many hundreds of years, if you go to them and they haven't had any propaganda, they haven't had any media influence and or education, they will automatically sort of or naturally um, come up with this idea of, okay, it's thundering because we've upset the thunder god. Um, that part of it is
Mm.
natural. Now, to then we can ask, is it also natural to say, no, no, there's no divine being, but there's just a divine law. There's a divine, like, cosmic law. There's the laws of the universe. There's a naturalistic explanation. Is that also natural? And I would say yes, because again, go back to the condom
Mm.
issue, go back to the nail clipping issue. In some sense, if we do it, it's natural because we are natural, right?
Sure.
But
I would say like
I
nail cutting is good for you, and Islam teaches you to cut nails, for example, right?
yes,
So
yes.
it's
So
it's good for
a better
you, and it
question,
works for your
yeah.
long term benefit. Yeah. So just to because I want to have a nice 10-minute chat with you about how's life, because this is where we all this came from in the first place, right? And that's really important. But so let's do our sort of roundups, and we've got this great question from Mike: are God's laws or Sharia laws good essentially or bad? And I think that's the heart of the question really. And I've always said, like, when I say good or bad, I use long-term happiness as a measure. But I want to have the last say. I'm going to have tried to follow Claire's suggestion about summarizing the video. So you have a minute or so answering this question as best as you can, please, AJ.
Uh, does AJ think Sharia is good laws?
Yeah. So essentially, what I'm saying
Okay.
is, I'm trying to say that maybe we got to this question or this point where I'm saying there is a thing called nature and a higher self, and it's defined by God, because otherwise it's very fuzzy. And let's just say there is a thing called a higher self, and I suppose that's how we've come to this question. Like maybe you might not think it's the best summary of the whole video, but for me, it's a very important question. So if you wouldn't mind somehow trying to answer, like, does this serve our higher self, our long-term happiness, the Sharia, or generally laws of God in different religions?
Yeah, I think that's a very big question to ask at the end of discussion like this. It deserves almost
Yeah.
its own discussion. Maybe that can be the topic of our next discussion.
Hmm.
I don't think I can go back to your thing. I want to answer it the way I want to answer. I don't think there's a yes or no answer. Like, do I think UK law is good law or bad law? Well, or do I think Australian law is good law or bad law? Or do I think Buddhist law is, well, some parts are good, some parts are bad. That's the part nature of law, in that there's some parts that I agree with, there's some parts that I don't agree with. Sharia just means justice. Okay, so if you're asking me, I'm trying to be the most helpful. If you're asking me, in the majority of for the majority of Muslims living at the moment, the way they interpret Sharia, kind of the majority opinion, the opinion that's backed by the many muftis and the imams and the sort of the power centers of Islamic opinion at the moment, the way they interpret Sharia, is that on the whole something that I agree with? Mm, I don't know. Again, probably 50-50, I would say. Like
Hmm.
charity, things like
Let's
this,
say
things like
Sharia according to
universal
what you
values.
understand.
Sorry?
Let's just try to make it as like
Well,
the
I'm trying
best
to
case
answer
scenario.
Mike's question as
Okay,
helpfully as
sure.
it will be to Mike, rather than
Hmm.
reinterpreting my own. I can do both. So in that sense,
Hmm.
no, because for example, people would say, wearing a hijab is Sharia, or some of the, people may say, having multiple wives is Sharia. I don't see that in the Quran. I don't see that as a. I think people have interpreted those things and made them kind of like with a human nature, where they think, oh, it suits my existing perspective. I like doing it, therefore it's natural. It suits my existing perspective. I like
So
doing
I
it,
don't
therefore
think
it's
it's
Sharia.
clear for
So
you from what you're
there's a
saying
thing.
that Sharia is wonderful. That doesn't seem to be something that you seem to be saying in that one
No, no.
minute. And
So
I would
Sharia
say,
means, yeah, Sharia means justice. So if someone, if
yeah,
giving to the
Sharia as
needy.
in the laws of God, especially in Islam, that's what we're talking about, because that's what I'm sure Mike is saying.
Well, I don't want to, again, there's no one definition of that, because I would say
Yeah,
Islam is interpreted differently and we're individually accountable for
sure.
what that is. And we don't have a group think and just follow what the group says.
Sure.
Sharia means is justice. To the extent that I want to pursue justice. So to the extent that laws are just, I think they're
Yeah,
good laws, a bit of a circular argument. But we can look at
sure.
examples. So for example, the um, enforced wearment of veils and hijab, I don't think is a good law. Morality
Cool.
police running down the street telling you how you should dress, I don't think that's a good law. I don't think capital punishment is a good law. So if someone's definition of Sharia contains that, and the majority of Muslims, and especially majority of Muslim countries, theocracies at the moment, do believe that, I disagree with that definition of Sharia. But
Okay,
again,
sure.
I'm
Let
not
me
sure what
wrap
larger
up, and
point
then we
Mike's
do.
going to.
I'll try to be really quick. So, you pointed out a couple of Sharia ideas, like wearing the hijab, that you might say is part or is not. I would say is part of the Sharia, the teachings of Islam, and capital punishment, and I'd say that is part of the teachings of Islam. And to answer your question, I would say each of those cases there is evidence to say that is very good for human society. So there's a study, for example, that women who choose to wear, and this is very important, they choose to wear.
Yeah, that's why I said enforced
Um,
wearing of hijab.
Yeah, sure. That's an important kind of balance to the argument. Yeah. So people who choose to wear modest clothing have less, especially women, have less body image issues. There's all sorts of studies that keep supporting the teaching of Islam. I think, Mike, though, you don't do yourself any favors because you will pay for sort of your arrogance, I would describe, in keeping ignoring the facts that I keep providing. That I'm not talking about, for example, Santa Claus and these are the most realistic ideas. To believe in God is more realistic than not. We've already said that a couple of times. So where's that? I don't know where that comment's gone. But anyway, the all capital punishment is a very important idea to deter so much harm in society, and it's justice as well. If you kill somebody, you should also be killed for that. And sometimes, yeah. So there's all sorts of very strong arguments for the teaching of Islam is for your own benefit. I would say in the West, I find increasingly arrogant. We just keep ignoring all the facts we're hearing in a video like this, and keep repeating our own talking points and ignoring them. So, Mike, don't do that. It's not good for yourself. You're getting older, and you're going to be alone, I'm sure, because you're not married. And this is the cost of being arrogant and ignoring reality and ignoring all the facts that I'm providing you for your own benefit. Anyway, I'm not at all angry. I'm just saying I like to be direct with people I love, like yourself, Mike. Okay, so how are you doing? We've only got 5 minutes. What's been going on in your life that you enjoy, and even things that are not going so well?
Yeah, fine. I've not had much new to report or going on since the last time we had a discussion. I'm glad that after a few weeks of missing it, we've got this back. And also we missed Quran class last week. So I mean, these are things that and I've not been able to attend martial arts class as much in the past couple of months, although there is a small chance I could get back to it. But charity work and asylum seeker support commitments keep piling up, and I tend to prioritize those. So those kind of things I look for as a barometer, as a pulse, taking the pulse in my week or my day. Well, my day is kind of okay because I have meditation, I have yoga. Those are constants in my day, which helps me center myself. But in my week and in my month, yeah, there have been some things that have been quite challenging. So hopefully they will return soon. But well, hopefully we
So
can have
is
Quran class back
challenging a
again.
good word? Does that a good thing?
I don't know. I try not to personally in my own. I mean, when I'm helping someone else, when I'm discussing with someone else, I try not to. It's like human nature. It's like natural. These kind of words where we use them as descriptors and we think they may mean things, but like good or bad. There's good or bad in a lot of things. So I try not to see it that way. I just try and see it in a more stoic way, saying it's happening, and what utility, what can I learn from it, and to try and reduce, suffering. So I guess, yeah, if it's causing other suffering, I try and reduce it. So if it's challenging, well, it's challenging in that there's people who are suffering, and I want to help them. For example, asylum seekers, for example, ex-Muslims, for example, other people in need, refugees, and it's challenging in that it's something that I've not mastered yet, and it's probably a
Hmm.
lifelong skill to
I think it's
manage my
helpful
time.
always to, well, in our modern society where we don't watch the internal, our feelings all the time, and we should watch it really carefully.
Mhm.
Um, we should always measure. Does that seem to be giving me peace? That's a peace is a
Yes.
good word, I think. Um, not necessarily ecstatic excitement all the time, because I think I try to describe peace as in this other dimension where there's the ups and downs of excitement, where your body has a limitation of how much it can, like when you have a distorted sound because the device can't understand, like a microphone can't understand really loud sound and it cuts off. It's like that. We got physical pleasures where there's even with, like, for example, sex, there's a maximum to which we can really enjoy, and it's dangerous to only think in those terms. But there's a third dimension which I call peace. Inner peace is a really good word, and meaning and things like that. And that seems to be really powerful to human beings. Even Viktor Frankl talks about this kind of essential need for meaning. So when, let's say, I would say, when you're helping people, feel like I would say a good way to measure it is like, make sure you're not doing too much, but but pushing yourself enough. It's just like an exercise, when you're like doing reps, right? You don't want to do really light dumbbells or something, because you're not benefiting from it. How do you feel about that? Like,
Yeah,
help people, push yourself a little bit, but don't be too easy on yourself, but not too hard on yourself either.
Yeah, I try and aim for a flow state. Things that I can control, I try and aim for a flow state. So, for example, in exercise, for example, in work patterns, if I have to work for a few hours, or how I'm feeling. If I'm just not feeling it, if I'm having to struggle, I'll just go and do something else, and I won't try and force myself to work on this particular task. Maybe I want to go and clean my house. Maybe I want to go and, I don't know, yeah, do some yoga or exercise or something like this. So, in that sense, yes, because it's within my control. But if I get a call at 2 a.m. in the morning saying, I did last month, saying one of the asylum seekers that I'm trying to support is, in the hospital, and many of them are on suicide risks and, have suicide attempts. That you can't control that. That's come into your life. And again, I don't believe in God, but I
You
would say
can. You
for
can decide not to go.
whatever, huh? Sorry, I can
You
decide not to
you have
go.
to, yeah,
I
because
can decide not to
you
go.
have to take care of yourself as well. Like, you have to have that balance. Like,
Sure, yeah, that's an
yeah.
option. I'm aware that that's an option, but this is what I've chosen. And the thing is, I'm not. If I choose not to, would that be taking care of myself? Because I'll be at home worried that I didn't do that. So, and that
Mm.
person isn't help, and I'm not doing it. So I try not to. I don't.
I'm not saying always.
I
Like,
really
let's say there's 100 suicide
sure
cases, you go to
exactly.
50 of them, and then you
Yeah,
realize, because I think the helpful thing about believing in a God, or being aware of God, because it's not just a belief, is that you realize it's not all up to you. It's like you just do your bit, and there's
exactly.
a pattern.
And I realized that
Yeah.
without believing in God, you realize that
Mm.
just having a secular humanistic outlook on the world, there's so many things we don't understand, whether we call that God or the cosmos, or just the nature of fate and destiny. There's so many things that we can't control. So many things happen by luck. So it's not, and it's not that I've done something, or like I went and helped her, or I went and helped a refugee, or whatever it may be. It happened. I was one part of it, and this is also the Stoic outlook on life. I'm not doing it. If we try and cling on to things and say, this is my thing, I've achieved it, that, as the Buddha teaches, and I
Mm.
adhere very much in these kind of things to Zen Buddhism and a mystical approach to life. Particularly Zen, I think, describes it very clearly in that what we cling to, we set ourselves up for suffering. Whether we include God in that or not, it doesn't really matter. If we say we've done the true, I think the best way to have God in our lives, if you need God in our lives, is to say, it's not, God knows best. I'm not doing anything. I'm just a
Mm.
tool. I'm here to do what I am, what I can, and with my best kind of intention and with my best mental faculties. But I can't always control the outcome. In fact,
Awesome.
almost never.
I
So
like that's.
that gives you a way to find peace, I think, because you realize it's not all in your hands.
I agree. I've made many mistakes in my life thinking that I'm too important in the scheme of things, and don't only find that really useful. Thank you so much, Alavari. Really appreciate your time. I know you're always up to millions of things, and that's cool to be up to all sorts of cool stuff. So until next time, thank you very much. Peace be upon you.
So I'm
Bye, Alexa.